My wife mocked my cheap watch during a business dinner. I said nothing. 2 hours later, a billionaire saw it and went pale. "Where did you get this?" he asked. I said my father's name. He stood up trembling. "Then she has no idea who you are. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." I should have seen it coming. After 30 years of marriage, you learn to read the signs. The way Zoe's jaw tightened when she looked at my clothes. The forced smile she gave the hostess. The subtle eye roll when I ordered the house wine instead of something from their premium selection. But I didn't expect what happened next. We were seated at Ristorante Milano, one of those places where the lighting is dim enough to hide imperfections, but bright enough to showcase wealth. The mahogany tables gleamed under soft amber lights, and the scent of garlic and aged wine hung in the air like an expensive perfume. Zoe had insisted we come here for my meeting with potential clients from Henderson Development Group. "This could change everything for us, Dennis," she'd said while getting ready, applying her makeup with the precision of a surgeon. "These people have real money, don't embarrass me." I'd nodded, adjusting the simple navy suit I'd owned for 15 years. It was clean, pressed, respectable. But as I sat across from Richard Pemberton and his wife Catherine, I could feel Zoe's disapproval radiating from beside me like heat from a furnace. The conversation had been going well. Richard seemed genuinely interested in our company's logistics capabilities. We were discussing a potential contract worth $200,000 when I reached for my water glass. That's when Zoe saw it. My watch. It was nothing special to look at. A simple steel case, aged leather strap worn soft from decades of wear. The face was clean white with black numbers, no diamonds or gold plating. My father had given it to me when I turned 18, and I'd worn it every day since. "Oh my God, Dennis," Zoe's voice cut through our conversation like a knife. "You're still wearing that old thing?" The table fell silent. Richard and Catherine looked up from their menus, clearly uncomfortable. I felt my cheeks warm as I glanced down at my wrist. "It keeps good time," I said quietly, trying to steer the conversation back to business. Zoe laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Good time? Dennis, that watch looks like it came from a garage sale. What will these people think?" "Zoe," I started, but she wasn't finished. "I've been telling him for years to get something decent," she said to the Pembertons, as if I wasn't sitting right there. "But he's so stubborn about spending money even on something as basic as a proper timepiece." Catherine Pemberton shifted in her seat, clearly wanting to be anywhere else. Richard cleared his throat and reached for his wine glass. "I keep telling him, what's the point of working so hard if you're going to walk around looking like you shop at thrift stores?" Zoe continued, her voice getting louder with each word. "Sometimes I wonder if he even cares about making a good impression." My throat felt tight. 30 years of marriage, and she still found new ways to cut me down. I could feel the other diners glancing our way, their conversations growing quieter as they strained to listen to the spectacle at our table. "The watch has sentimental value," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Zoe scoffed. "Sentimental value doesn't pay bills, Dennis. It doesn't make people take you seriously." I looked down at the watch face, remembering the weight of my father's hand on my shoulder the day he gave it to me. "This belonged to my father," I said. "Your father who worked in a shipyard his whole life," Zoe shot back. "Your father who never owned anything worth more than his monthly paycheck. God, Dennis, when are you going to stop living in the past and start thinking about our future?" The words hit me like physical blows. I felt something crack inside my chest, something that had been bending under pressure for years finally reaching its breaking point. Richard Pemberton was staring into his wine glass as if it held the secrets of the universe. His wife was studying her napkin with intense concentration. "Maybe we should order," I suggested weakly. "Yes, let's focus on why we're here," Zoe said, suddenly switching back to her charming hostess voice. "Dennis gets so emotional about the strangest things, it's actually sweet in a way." But the damage was done. The conversation limped along for another hour, but I could see it in Richard's eyes. The deal was dead. Who would want to do business with a man whose own wife treated him like a failure in public? As we waited for the check, Zoe excused herself to the restroom. Richard leaned forward slightly, his voice low. "That's an interesting piece you're wearing," he said, nodding toward my watch. I looked down at it, surprised. "Thank you, it's not worth much." "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward my wrist. Confused, I unbuckled the strap and handed it over. Richard held it carefully, turning it over in his hands. His expression changed as he examined the case back. His eyes widened slightly, and I saw his hand tremble almost imperceptibly. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice strange. "It was my father's," I said. "He gave it to me when I graduated high school." Richard continued staring at the watch, his breathing shallow. "What was your father's name?" "William Morrison," I replied, confused by the intensity in his voice. Richard went completely still. For a moment I thought he might faint. He looked up at me, then back down at the watch, then up at me again. "Morrison," he whispered. Zoe returned to the table, her lipstick freshly applied, chattering about dessert. She stopped mid-sentence when she saw Richard holding my watch. "I hope Dennis isn't boring you with stories about that old thing," she said with a forced laugh. Richard didn't respond. He was still staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. Slowly, carefully, he handed the watch back to me. "Keep it safe," he said quietly. "It's more important than you know." Zoe rolled her eyes. "See what I mean? Everyone's too polite to tell him the truth." But Richard wasn't being polite. There was something in his eyes that made my skin prickle, something that suggested this evening was far from over. As we gathered our things to leave, Richard pressed his business card into my hand. "Call me tomorrow," he said. "We need to talk." Walking to the car, Zoe was already dissecting every moment of the dinner, cataloging my failures like items on a shopping list. "Well, that was a disaster," she said, clicking across the parking lot in her heels. "Did you see their faces when you wouldn't shut up about that stupid watch? God, Dennis, sometimes I think you try to sabotage us." I unlocked the car in silence, my mind replaying the look in Richard Pemberton's eyes. Something about that watch had shaken him to his core. But what? And why did I have the feeling that everything was about to change? As I started the engine, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. For 30 years, I'd been the man Zoe saw when she looked at me. A disappointment, a failure, someone to be ashamed of. But tonight, for just a moment, I'd seen myself through different eyes. And something about that watch had caught Richard Pemberton's attention in a way that suggested there was more to this story than anyone knew, including me. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed listening to Zoe's steady breathing beside me, turning Richard Pemberton's business card over and over in my fingers until the edges were soft from handling. The way he'd looked at my watch kept playing in my mind like a broken record. This wasn't the first time someone had noticed it, but it was the first time anyone had reacted that way. Most people glanced right past it, just like Zoe said they would, just like she'd been telling me for 30 years. The clock on our nightstand read 3:47 when I gave up trying to sleep. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Zoe, and padded downstairs to the kitchen. Our house was modest, a 2-bedroom ranch we'd bought when we were first married. Beige walls, generic furniture from department stores, nothing that spoke to who we really were, or at least nothing that spoke to who I really was. I made coffee and sat at our small kitchen table, the watch laid out in front of me under the fluorescent light. In the harsh glare, it looked even more ordinary than usual. The leather strap was cracked in places, the steel case scratched from years of daily wear. But I'd never cared about its appearance. It was the last thing my father had given me before he died. The memories came flooding back, as they always did when I held the watch in the quiet hours. My father's voice, deep and gravelly from years of cigarettes. "This watch has been in our family for 3 generations, Dennis. It's not about what it's worth, it's about what it represents." I'd been 18 then, standing in his study overlooking the harbor. The smell of salt air drifted through the open windows, mixing with the leather and tobacco scent that always clung to his clothes. Ship models lined the shelves, each one a reminder of the business he'd built from nothing. "What does it represent?" I'd asked. "Choice," he'd said simply. "The choice to be who you really are, not who the world expects you to be." At the time, I thought I understood. Now, sitting in my kitchen at 3 in the morning 30 years later, I wondered if I'd ever understood anything at all. Zoe had made her opinion of my father clear from the beginning. To her, he was just a blue-collar worker who'd gotten lucky. She never understood why I spoke of him with such respect, why I kept his photograph hidden in my wallet, why I wore his watch every single day. "You're living in the past, Dennis," she'd say whenever his name came up. "Your father worked in a shipyard. He fixed boats. There's no shame in that, but there's no glory in it either." But she was wrong about him. She was wrong about a lot of things. My father hadn't just worked in shipyards, he'd owned them. Multiple shipyards, up and down the East Coast. Morrison Maritime had been one of the largest private shipping companies in the country when I was growing up. We'd lived in a mansion overlooking the ocean with staff and cars and everything money could buy, and I'd walked away from all of it. The decision had seemed so clear back then. I was 29, fresh out of business school, watching my father work 18-hour days to keep the company growing. I saw what that life had cost him. The missed dinners, the forgotten birthdays, the way business consumed every conversation, every thought, every moment of peace. When he died of a heart attack at 62, alone in his office at 2 in the morning, I knew I didn't want that life. I wanted something real, something meaningful. I wanted love that wasn't complicated by money or power or expectations. So I'd liquidated my shares in the company, put the money in trust, and walked away. I'd taken a job in logistics, rented a small apartment, and tried to build a normal life. That's where I'd met Zoe. She was working as a receptionist at a law firm then, beautiful and ambitious and full of plans for the future. She talked about wanting a simple life, a good man who would love her for who she was. She said she was tired of dating men who only cared about money and status. I thought I'd found my soulmate. For the first few years, it was everything I'd hoped for. We lived modestly but comfortably. Zoe seemed happy with our little apartment, our weekend trips to the lake, our quiet dinners at home. She never asked about my family or my past, and I didn't volunteer the information. I wanted to be loved for Dennis, the logistics coordinator, not Dennis, the Morrison heir. But gradually, things changed. Zoe started noticing what other people had. She began comparing our life to the lives of her friends, her co-workers, the people she saw in magazines. The contentment that had once filled our home was replaced by a restless dissatisfaction that grew stronger each year. "Why don't you ask for a promotion?" she'd say. "Why don't you look for a better job? Why are you so comfortable being mediocre?" I'd tried to explain that there were more important things than money, but she'd roll her eyes and change the subject. Over time, she stopped asking and started demanding. Then the demands became criticisms, and the criticisms became public humiliation. Like tonight. Sitting in our kitchen, I realized something that should have been obvious years ago. Zoe didn't love me. She probably never had. She loved the idea of me, the potential she saw in me, the life she thought I could give her if I just tried harder. But I'd been trying to be something I wasn't for so long that I'd forgotten who I really was. I picked up the watch and fastened it around my wrist, feeling the familiar weight of it settle against my skin. My father had been right about choice. For 30 years, I'd chosen to be the man Zoe wanted me to be. The man who apologized for his clothes, his car, his watch, his dreams. The man who sat quietly while his wife destroyed his dignity in front of strangers. I thought about Richard Pemberton's reaction, the way his hands had trembled when he'd held the watch. Something about it had shaken him, something that went far beyond its modest appearance. And tomorrow I was going to find out what that was. I finished my coffee as dawn light began creeping through our kitchen windows. Upstairs I could hear Zoe stirring, beginning another day of disappointment in the life she'd chosen. But something was different now. For the first time in years, I felt like I was waking up too. I had a phone call to make. The watch was all I had left of the man I used to be. But maybe, just maybe, it was enough to help me remember who I was supposed to become. I called Richard Pemberton at exactly 9 o'clock the next morning. My hands were steadier than I'd expected them to be, but my heart was racing as I dialed the number from his business card. "Richard Pemberton's office," came a crisp voice. "This is Dennis Morrison. Mr. Pemberton asked me to call." There was a pause, then the sound of papers shuffling. "Please hold, Mr. Morrison. He's been expecting your call." Within seconds, Richard's voice came through the line, urgent and intense. "Dennis, thank God you called. We need to meet, today." "About the contract?" I asked, though I already knew this had nothing to do with business. "No," he said quietly. "About your watch, about your father, about things you need to know." 2 hours later, I sat across from Richard in his private office on the 42nd floor of the Pemberton building. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, the city stretched out below us like a living map. His office was larger than my entire house, decorated with original paintings and furniture that probably cost more than I made in a year. But Richard barely seemed to notice his surroundings. He sat forward in his chair, his hands clasped tightly together, studying my face as if he were trying to solve a puzzle. "I need to ask you something," he said, "and I need you to think carefully before you answer. When your father gave you that watch, did he tell you anything about it? Anything about where it came from?" I shifted uncomfortably. "He said it had been in our family for 3 generations. "What else?" "That it was about choice, about being who you really are." Richard nodded slowly. "Did he ever mention the Morrison Maritime Corporation?" My throat went dry. I hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in over 20 years. "How do you know about that?" Richard's expression grew grave. "Because your father saved my life, and my company, and my family's entire future." The room felt like it was tilting. "I'm sorry, what?" Richard stood up and walked to a wall safe hidden behind a painting. With shaking hands, he withdrew a small wooden box and set it on his desk. Inside, nestled in black velvet, was a watch identical to mine. 1987, he said softly. I was 28 years old, fresh out of Harvard Business School, full of big ideas and bigger debts. My father had left me a small shipping company that was bleeding money faster than I could count it. I was 6 weeks away from bankruptcy when your father called me. I stared at the watch in the box, my mind reeling. My father called you? William Morrison didn't just own Morrison Maritime, Richard continued. He was the most respected man in the shipping industry. When smaller companies were failing, he'd step in, not to buy them out or absorb them, but to help them succeed. He saw potential where others saw problems. Richard picked up his watch, holding it carefully. He gave me a loan of $5 million. No collateral required except my word. He said if I was serious about building something lasting, I needed to prove it to myself first. $5 million, I whispered. The terms were simple. Pay it back when I could, with minimal interest, but there was one condition. Richard's voice grew thick with emotion. I had to accept this watch. He said it was a reminder that some things matter more than money, that trust once given was sacred. My hand moved instinctively to my wrist, feeling the familiar weight of my father's watch. You paid him back? Every penny, plus interest. It took me 15 years, but I paid every cent. By then, Pemberton Development had become what it is today. He gestured to the opulent office around us. Your father made all of this possible. The room was spinning now. All these years, I'd thought my father was just a successful businessman. I'd never known about the loans,